Welcome back. For this lecture, we're going to focus on the 7 modern perspectives. No, they're not the 7 deadly sins, but they are actually 7 different ways in which researchers and psychologists view why we do what we do. Some researchers focus on one specific school of thought, such as biological perspective, while others take a more eclectic approach that incorporates multiple points of view. There is no single perspective that is what we call better than another. Each simply emphasizes different aspects of human behavior. So before we get started, I want you to take out a blank piece of paper. We're going to take a step back into your early elementary school days. I want you to place your hand on the paper and trace it. No, we're not going to make hand turkeys like you made in kindergarten, although fall is my favorite season. Now that you have your hand traced, I want you to start with your thumb and number your fingers 1 through 5. When you're done with that, place 6 in the palm of your hand and 7 at your wrist. Now, on the same paper, I want you to number your paper and you will be writing the perspectives that coordinate with each number. I know this sounds a bit involved, but when you get to class, it will make a lot more sense. This is how your paper should look. Do you have your hand ready? If not, go ahead and pause, finish up your hand paper, and then press play when you're ready to start. Okay. Now that you have your hand ready to go, we're going to get moving with our perspectives. Okay, let's move to the perspective number 1, which is your thumb, the psychodynamic perspective. Psychodynamic is based on the studies of Sigmund Freud and takes the approach that our mental processes and behavior reflect the constant and mostly unconscious psychological struggles going on within ourselves. These struggles involve conflict between the impulse to satisfy instincts, such as those for food, sex, or aggression, and the need to obey the rules that a culture or society has set. During Freud's time, he seemed to focus on the instinct of sex a lot. This more modern spin, though, balances this out by focusing less on sex and looking at many other innate instincts. He looks at the unconscious through use of examining dreams and what he called word association, but we'll get more into that when we get to the chapter on personality. Cognitive perspective is the second perspective, so number 2. Cognitive perspective emphasizes processes such as language, memory, thinking, and processing. The cognitive perspective developed in response to the behavioral perspective that only observed what we did. Researchers, though, believed that it was what occurred inside the mind that was essential to the understanding of humans. The cognitive perspective was also heavily influenced by the computer revolution. You know, the idea that computers can only do what you tell them to do? Information in, information out. The cognitive perspective tries to figure out how we produce complex behaviors, such as remembering a fact, naming an object, or even making a decision. The behavioral perspective is going to be represented by your middle finger and is the third perspective that we will be discussing. We briefly covered behavior in our last lecture. Remember? If you can't observe it, it doesn't count. Well, 2 influential researchers by the name of B.F. Skinner and John Watson were particularly interested in how behavior is learned. According to behaviorists, we come to learn how to behave based on past experiences that were either rewarding or punishing. They believe that behavior problems come from faulty learning. For example, if we observe a child who is aggressive, well, they may have learned that aggression through seeing other family members or friends who acted aggressively. The child may have also experienced some kind of reward through their aggression. If they were taking a toy from another child, the reward would be being able to play with the toy when they take it. So this impacts their learning. Humanistic perspective is a fairly modern perspective developed by a gentleman named Carl Rogers. Humanistic perspective emphasizes the notion that human nature is generally good and people naturally are motivated to grow towards their own potential. He believed that this gets messed up, though, when we try to please others that we might be in relationship with. He also theorized that through what he labeled as unconditional positive regard, or in other words, being accepted for being who we are by others, an individual could be true to themselves, improving their self-esteem and self-worth, and eventually becoming self-actualized. Another leading figure in the humanistic movement was Abraham Maslow, who pointed out that the need to be true to yourself can really only emerge after more basic needs are met and created what he called the hierarchy of needs. He listed prerequisites to finding self-actualization, like hunger, thirst, safety, and feeling connected to other people. Really, if you think about it, do we care about being self-actualized if we're starving? Probably not. Next is the biological perspective. The biological perspective is also sometimes labeled as neuroscience or neuropsychology. This perspective emphasizes the link between behavior and biological functioning of the brain. It says that if somebody's behavior is abnormal, that something biological must be to blame. As technology has advanced over the past several decades, researchers have more and better access to the inner workings of the brain, enabling us to provide explanation for all kinds of behavior. For example, particular parts of the brain respond to addictive drugs as well as addictive behaviors. We know that your emotions, like anger and fear, take place in what we call the amygdala. Although we've been learning more and more about brain behavior connection, there is still so much more to learn. We are just getting started on biological perspective. The sixth perspective that we'll be exploring is called socio-cultural. This is also a newer perspective that challenges the assumptions held by the older schools of psychology. Cultures can create certain general tendencies in behavior and mental processes among people living in them. It defines the culture as the values, rules of behavior, forms of expression, maybe religious beliefs, occupational choices, and the like for a group of people who share a common language and environment. Culture is seen really as a stabilizing influence and either encourages or discourages particular behavior and thoughts. Under the banner of sociocultural perspective, we distinguish between the collectivist and the individualistic cultures. A collectivist culture tends to place value on group efforts and sees the goals of a group such as a family or work to take precedence over their own personal goals. In contrast, the individualistic culture values personal rather than group goals and achievements. Competitiveness to distinguish oneself from others is common in these cultures. The United States is actually an example of an individualistic culture. Last but certainly not least, we're going to look at the seventh perspective, evolutionary. Evolutionary was developed by Charles Darwin and the idea of natural selection. It's all about survival of the fittest. Those whose behavior and appearance allow them to withstand the elements, avoid predators, and mate are able to survive and produce offspring with similar characteristics. I mean, have you ever asked yourself, hey, why am I attracted to the people that seem to light my fire? Well, according to evolutionary perspective, it's all because they have biological characteristics that would prove to be a good mate for your species. Doesn't that sound hot? We're not going to focus much on this particular perspective in this class, but we do want you to be aware of it. Well, there are many different ways to think about human thought and behavior, as you can tell. The variety of perspectives in modern psychology really give researchers and students tools to approach problems and help them find new ways to explain and predict human behavior, leading to the development of new treatment approaches for problem behaviors. I want to thank you for going through this. What I would like you to do is go ahead and bring your diagram of your hand to class, and we're going to follow up with doing an exercise there. I want to thank you again, and I'll see you soon.